All right. I think most people are probably connected, so let's get started officially. So, welcome to this online presentation from the Seven Foundation. As an organization, the Foundation is committed to in-depth journalism, and in particular, the role that images play in journalism. And we think about that in terms of focusing on visual storytelling as kind of the core around which reporting can unfold. I think what's going to be great about hearing about this particular project is it's a stellar example of that, where visual storytelling and the reporting and the collaboration have come together to produce something quite remarkable. And we want to look at how it was made, the particular issues it's covering, and then questions of the impact. So, Kiana, Mélissa, welcome. You've collaborated over a 6-month period, I think with the support of the Carmignac Foundation, to do this project on the condition of women and girls in Afghanistan in the wake of the Taliban returning to power. I think in the presentation you're going to show us what is also interesting. You use different media to document the situation. Photographs, sketches, videos, and sometimes artwork from some of the participants themselves. So we're looking forward to seeing that and thinking around the issues around that. But to kick us off, before you actually take us through the presentation, a question for you both. How did you decide to collaborate with one another, and why was it important for you to collaborate?
Should I go? Yeah. When this opportunity came up to apply for the foundation, I'll be very honest, I was going through, mentally speaking, I was not in the right place to go back to Afghanistan. I was recovering from a bad incident. So sitting down, kind of like writing down what are the pros and cons. And then it was my partner's suggestion that maybe you should have a second person with you to like it's a very difficult topic. So to like get through that. And then thinking about who's the right person, I've known Mélissa for a long time as a friend, and I knew she specialized in women's rights. So I reached out to Mélissa, but turns out Mélissa Mélissa told me she also wants to talk about something with
Uh,
me on that call. Um,
so I already had some notes in my note apps on my phone that I showed her later, which was also like, oh, this is very interesting, and this is something I should talk to Kiana about. So it was actually really nice. And I agree with Kiana, like mentally, it's a really hard situation context to work in. It's also very hard interviews, and we'll get back to that later. But it also made a lot of sense because I'm a researcher on women's rights. My background is in human rights law. So I already had kind of this background in terms of where to find the information and the networks and trying to maybe build a framework to understanding all of that. I was also very interested in all of the creative approach. I love Kiana's photos, but also sketches and trying to find collaborative forms of art. So it was a very good partnership, and even much more than the addition of just our skills. It was a constant dialogue, and we were really feeding it into each other's into the project.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Mélissa, you're going to take us through the presentation. So I will bring that up on the screen.
Thank you.
You guys can begin.
So, No Woman's Land is a project that Kiana and I realized last year with the support of the Carmignac Photojournalism Prize. And we were very lucky because this prize, which is more of a grant, really, pick a different topic or a different country every year and awards one or a team of photographers, researchers, journalists with a grant and 6 months to realize a reportage. So we had the luxury of spending 10 weeks in Afghanistan over a period of 6 months. We traveled to 7 provinces, met with more than 100 women and girls, and No Woman's Land is the project resulting from this reportage. We'll get through some of the different angles of thinking that Kiana and I have been working, everything related to how we prepared, security, ethics, how we worked as a team, the creative process, because some of the photos might be quite different from what you usually expect when you talk about Afghanistan, our own relationship to the project, to the women we interviewed and photographed, how we wanted to represent them, and then, of course, the question of impact. So I'll start with this panel to talk about the first topic, which is really kind of the more logistical one. Afghanistan is a very difficult context to work in. Going there, Kiana and I could not travel as journalists, so we had to find ways to safely travel there. But even more importantly, we had to always think about the safety and security of the women we would meet. A lot of the portraits we took, we had to find creative ways, for example, for the women to be able to tell their story without their face being recognizable. And for example, you can see an example of that on the right, or interpreters or drivers. So a lot of the project actually happened in the preparation phase. We had to think about how do we store the data. For example, the captions, the interviews I would do would be completely separate from the photos that Kiana would take, because as you'll see, all of the photos are respectful photos. We don't have dramatic, violent photos, even though the stories we tell are quite violent and dramatic. So by separating the story and the photos, we also try to minimize the ways in which we would protect the woman. For example, if the Taliban would check our laptops, we would be able to, we would keep the names and phone numbers and identification separate as well, so they would not be able to retrace who we've been interviewing and things like that.
Should I talk about?
Yeah, how we met women, for example.
Yeah, so we basically, each of us, Melissa and I, had our network of people, either through, both of us had lived in Afghanistan, so we already had friends and people that we worked with or photographed before. And in an environment now where communication was very sensitive, you had to be careful about how you reach out to people, knowing that some of the women meeting with you could endanger them within their communities. We use our contact to kind of like create a tree and ask everyone, okay, we're looking for these cases. Do you know anyone? Someone will pass you on. But that already create like a base level of trust, because the recommendation was coming from somebody that they knew. And that definitely has helped with our intimate access that we had. But what was very important was about getting, how do you obtain consent when the situation is changing so fast? Because we had already seen in the last 2 years how much the situation had changed, and so you never know the photograph that you take now, how is it gonna appear in a year from now with the new laws. So we constantly had to have the conversation with the women themselves, and if the women were not educated enough to make those decisions on their behalf, through people who introduced us to them, to understand what their situation is and how to protect them the best. There had been times where women wanted to show their faces, and we had to have a conversation whether that's wise or not. And that is something we're going to come back to about agency.
It was a difficult discussion we had sometimes because, like Kiana said, some women were very eager to show their faces, and sometimes we had to be more conservative because, for example, some of the women might not have social media or might not necessarily know how that once the photos are posted online, we completely lose control over them. So sometimes we did have to be more conservative, and it was, I guess, a painful decision to make because it also, we wanted to respect their agency and their ability to make a decision while also understanding that the risk might be quite high. So this is something that was very much at the back of our head at all time, and something we really had to make a case-by-case decision on that. Ken, I don't know if you want to talk about these two photos in terms of protecting identities.
Yeah. And also, like, that is something I think it really helped to be two people on this project together, because sometimes if you're working solo, you get sucked into this environment without thinking clear. But being the two of us and also having a safe and trusting circle of friends, we could bounce off and discuss this every night. We would talk about, like, what do you think about what happened and the safety of the people who photograph. This is a great example of that. We were also trying to document what it means to be a member of LGBTQI community within Afghanistan, which already before Taliban took over, it always has been a taboo and very difficult for them. They're prosecuted legally, and with even within their communities, they're how do you say it? they have a hard time. But since Taliban has taken over, before Taliban took over, there were corners of safety for them, some NGOs to do things for them, so they could always turn to them. With the arrival of Taliban, that has disappeared. Here, it's a father and a child. No, it's a parent and a child. And I'm so sorry. It may get complicated, and I'll explain why. The parent is married and have got children, but they identify as a woman. They run two parallel lives, one with their families and the society, and one a private one, until they were arrested. Not once but 3 times. Lived through horrendous thing. The child, born as a girl, identifies as a boy, dresses up as a boy, like their body language is like a boy, and they are 12, which means as of when we took this photo the following year, they couldn't attend school, because as a biological girl, girls are banned from education, is banned for them. So it's a very complex story, and complex, and it was very important to protect them, because at the time we met them, we knew eventually at some point they're going to leave Afghanistan, but we don't know when. So we have kept in touch with them. We have kept in close contact with them at every step of their movement to make sure they're fine before we decide to, even though the photos are anonymous and everything, but we had to make sure where they are and how the situation is. And this is something we've done with many of the cases that we've documented.
A lot of the scene as well, for example, on the right, it's a photo of an activist who also have a beauty parlor at home. So some ways of taking photos allow to still tell a story in a safe way for them. Similarly, for the left, we followed a group of teenage girls, including one day for a snowball fight. We had a lot of amazing photos from that snowball fight, but we always had to make the decision to go for the safest photo in terms of concealing their identity, especially when it comes to younger women.
And I'll add just one more thing on that note, is when I was shooting different scenarios, either people had given me full access, I could photograph everything, but even in those situations, I would photograph things anonymously as well. Comes a time, but because we were doing this project to be published about a year later, so I had no idea. So I had to have safe options in case if something comes out and we can't publish their photos. So that snowball is a perfect example of that, where I photographed everything with faces showing, without faces showing, and so on.
And this is another example. We interviewed 12 women journalists as part of kind of a chapter of the project. And these are 4 examples of them. We used this ray of light to show their eyes, their hands, something that came back a lot in the interviews, where them describing how they are the eyes and ears of society. So it was important for us to find a way to show this in a manner that was still safe for them. We were quite proud of this one, because even the boss of some of these young women journalists could not recognize them in the photos. So we knew that we had done a good job on that. So this was kind of like the first intro on security and ethics. It's quite long, but to be honest with you, it took a lot of time and energy, and it was such a crucial part of the project, because it was an incredibly limiting constraint in a way in our work. So so many photos, for example, we have are incredible, but we will not be able to show them unless potentially the woman in the photo can leave the country. And we are in contact still with a lot of them. So we're hoping that some of these options we might be able to use in the future.
And it's an ongoing discussion pretty much with every publication we have. We ask the publication to come back to us with the selection to make sure, because sometimes even the photo on its own is fine, but the way they pair it up with the text will not be okay. And it can get the women in danger more than anyone else. So it's actually probably labor-wise, it's been one of the most consuming projects we've worked on.
Working as a team, I wouldn't say there was a lot of separation in our roles, Kiana and I. She was sitting with me in all of the interviews I did. She was asked for extra questions that maybe I didn't think about, or she would ask for visual questions that maybe I don't think about, because that's not my background. Just like I would be here when Kiana would take portraits and sometimes help by, holding a flashlight, for example, or handing something, or holding a light or a mirror. But also it was a constant creative dialogue. And I think that's one of the thing that people who saw the exhibition or saw the project really came through, like how kind of strong the collaboration was and how it really fed into each other, just like the research fed into the photos. Of course, it's not just us. We were helped by a number of art teachers, interpreters, drivers, etc., which we cannot name. Most of them, we are in the process of trying to get them visas to go to France. So we hope that we can share more of their names and recognition and artwork for those who did some of the collaborative art we're going to talk about later. But right now, of course, security remains the most important. But I would highly encourage you for any creative projects. I think once you find someone that you can work with really well, it's a blessing really, because then the project becomes just so much bigger and more interesting. The neon lights and the creative approach. Kiana, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
I have been photographing Afghanistan for almost like nearly a decade, like 9 years. And by that time, I have fallen into this cycle of photographing the same way. And with this project, for the first time, because I didn't have any client, I wanted to be different. I wanted to do something different. So in our back and forth and inspired by films that my partner Jordan Bryan has made, he uses a lot of neon lights in his work. And anyone who has been to Afghanistan, they know Afghans love neons. Like you go out to restaurants, coffee shops, ice cream shops, everything is in neon. And we know one thing is noticeable from 3 years ago before Taliban took over is women are erased from public spaces. It was initially it was very slow, and then after that, so we decided instead of let's take the neon lights into their homes. So I, with the use of a strobe and gels, and inspired by the scenes that we're used to seeing on the streets outside, we photographed these women with neon lights. And Mélissa also had a huge help because there was many times it's a small, like you have to be very quick photographing people. You're going to their homes. You can't spend too much time. So a lot of time Mélissa was holding lights for me, acting as a tripod, and so we wanted to show women in a different light, and it photographed them differently. The reason I chose medium format, like a square format, because it's a very slow project, and I think it's a very beautiful medium format, square format. It's a beautiful frame for a slow project. It kind of in my brain when I'm shooting square, I slow down, whereas when I'm shooting like the regular format, I'm running around and acting fast, reacting to the scene. Whereas this one, I think Mélissa and I were not reacting to the scene, we were creating, if that makes any sense. Mélissa, do you want to talk about the way we photograph the women, the dignity and...
Yeah, and this will come right after. Maybe just to add something, I was also really happy about Kiana's approach, because a lot of the way that photographers portray Afghanistan is always the same scene and the same colors. And some of the photos you see, you don't know if it's from the 70s, the 90s, or just a few years ago. So I think it was good to kind of bring this element of not modernity, but at least this different palette that very much exists in Kabul, but a lot of photographers are more attracted to kind of like the more traditional representations of Afghanistan. And to add on this, we also use other mediums. We used video, we used sketches, we used a lot of text and research. But one of those chapters that we really enjoy making was called The Dreams Girls. We wanted to show girls, we worked with 10 teenagers and an art teacher. We wanted to show their dreams, and we wanted to do something a little bit more participative because we had the time to do so. So what we did is we asked them, what's your dream? And for example, she wants to be a globetrotter. So we took portraits of them posing as they dream, and then with the help of the art teacher, they painted on top of it to kind of complete the picture of that dream. This photo is from a little bit earlier when you see us holding the light, for example. We're taking a photo of the young lady on the left because she wants to be a heart surgeon. And then with the help of her art teacher, she painted the rest of the surgery room. It was a very, I think, empowering way for them to regain a little bit of control, even though it was also really sad because these dreams that they're painting only exist on paper right now in Afghanistan. they cannot achieve these dreams because of the Taliban. She, for example, wants to be a parkour athlete.
Can I add something to it?
Of course.
And I think it's very significant to note, because in Afghanistan, and this is not generally, like, even before Taliban, because of the cycle of conflict and violence that exists, you see that people generally, the young people don't have the ability to dream ahead. If you ask them, what are you doing 10 years from now, they're just unable to dream about something. So the fact we found these girls who, under Taliban, what all the opportunities are taken away from them, and they're able to think about things that it's so far away, to dream about being a globetrotter. Afghan passports is worth nothing. So for a girl to be able to dream that I can be a globetrotter, that's already like, wow. So we were blown away by that. And it was a beautiful collaboration.
We're hoping that the art teacher can make it to France so that we can integrate her into our talks and give her the credit she deserves. When it comes to the distance, like we said, we had the luxury of time, and it's not really a luxury either, because today in Afghanistan, it's so tense and complicated, and women also, they are at risk, so they might not really want to open up that easily. So a lot of time when it was safe, we spent a lot of time with these women and girls. For example, you'll see later, we have a lot of photos of joy as a form of resistance. There's a group of teenagers that we spent many times visiting over the course of a few months, whether it was for a birthday party or to go see the art classes they were taking. So for us, trying to establish this trust relationship was really important, so that we could manage to to get to that point when they finally relax and we can get a good representation of the scene. On the right, for example, this is a maternity ward in Zabul in the south of Afghanistan. We were lucky enough to be able to spend 4 days in Zabul, and so every day and also at nights in the evening we would be able to go to the maternity wards. We stayed, until 9 a.m., 11 p.m. 9 p.m., 11 p.m. midnight, to really spend time with the nurses and the midwives and chit chat, because it's a little bit quieter. The patients of the day are gone. They have a delivery every once in a while, and so we kind of become part of the background. They tell us kind of like funnier story, more personal stories as well. So it was really interesting to be able to see how the photos would evolve also after 1 day, 2 days, 3 days of going back to the same place, for example. On the left is a photo of an interview we did in Herat. It was a very difficult story because it was a woman who was victim of domestic violence and the husband was also beating her daughters. She had managed to escape, but it was still a very heavy interview. So we had to take time after the interview to also stay and kind of like make sure that the interview, to get out of the interview, like to go back to a more like normal and quiet setting before we left. And when we left, of course, we had a pretty emotional scene, both Kiana and I.
And this is the luxury we had with this project. Unfortunately, when you're shooting, when you're on assignment, you don't have the luxury of going back to the same maternity ward for 1 frame or 2 frames 4 nights in a row. That you just don't have that luxury. But you could see if you look at the sequence of the photos from those nights, you can see how the access got better and better, to the point that by the 4th day, I was just let into the birthing room and be able to do whatever I want to, because then people trust you.
And very much linked to that was the whole question of representation. Some of the photos you saw earlier, the photos with the neons, are quite colorful and even joyful sometimes. But once you read the caption, you realize that it's actually a dramatic story. To give you an example very quickly, because it's one of my favorite photos. The first photo on the left is a portrait of Muska, who is 14. She's a returnee from Pakistan, and she's engaged. She's a child bride because her family is struggling so much financially that they had no choice but to agree to marry her off to the son of her landlord in exchange for a well and solar panel, so the equivalent of a few $100s. And the situation we encountered, the violence of domestic violence, of child marriage, of poverty, are all pretty hard, but it was important for us to know, to not show these Afghan women as a victim. They are victims, of course, but we wanted to show them really with the respect and the dignity that they deserve, even the love that they deserve, to be honest. And that's why I think people were quite surprised at the exhibition, to see this, how we would represent such a dramatic situation. But this was a quite conscious decision we made from the beginning to, for example, not show women in burqa begging for bread, because this is a reality. But we decided that, we deserve to see, they deserve to show their face even if the face is covered, and they deserve to be showed in a more respectful manner.
And if you
And
look,
that, yeah.
sorry. And if you look at the whole project as a whole, which we will guide you how you can later on. The purpose of this presentation is not to show you the work, but to talk about the process of it. But if you look at the project, you barely see any woman in burqa, and many of the women that we met, they are burqa wearing women. But we just gain their trust to accept to remove that burqa, and if they need to cover their face with their scarf, they do it. But that removing that unified uniform that they're forced to wear kind of give them individuality, and that's what we really try to highlight in this project.
And that's a nice transition into the next kind of chapter, which is also something very important for us, which is joy as a form of resistance. On our second day in Kabul in February, we had a snowstorm, and some of these Afghan teenage girls that we were following, we met them in a cafe, and then they wanted to go for snowball fights. We just like, oh, can we come with you? And it was really interesting because, first of all, the logistical element was super interesting. They had to find a quiet place where there wouldn't be checkpoint, where there wouldn't be Taliban, where they could just spend half an hour in the snow. So we followed them, and then to see them was very heartwarming in the sense that even in the harshest condition, if you are especially a child or a teenager, there's something very universal about the element of play and how joyful you can be if you manage to steal away half an hour with your friends. And of course, not all women and girls in Afghanistan have the luxury or even finding these moments, but it became very important for us to also show this aspect of their life. Without minimizing how difficult the circumstances is, we wanted to find also a way for the viewers in Paris and in London and in America to also connect better through some things that are very much universal, like spending an afternoon with your girlfriend, dancing and playing music, doing some art, even though you're not supposed to do all these things. So, of course, they all happen in secret. But we're very lucky because of the access we managed to get, because we had that time and we managed to establish that trust to spend, like, for example, the photo on the right was the birthday, the 16th birthday of one of these girls that we managed to go to. And we just spent the afternoon, like dancing and eating cake. And it was absolutely wonderful to see that they still managed to create this small space for themselves. Once again, we shouldn't minimize. Like the flip side of this is every single woman we asked them one question: do you have hope your situation can improve under the Taliban? And they all said no, and they all want to leave the country. But we really wanted to show both of these sides.
And it's also something that Melissa and I quite talked about it quite a lot. The resilience, like you hear this a lot. Oh, Afghans are resilient, and it was during this project that we kind of realized resilience is for privileged people. I mean, these women don't have the privilege of not getting back up. So they just continue and find these moments, or they carve out these spaces where they can just reclaim a little bit of freedom or a little bit of joy for themselves. So that's why we looked at joy as a form of resistance to for these women.
Our last kind of part is everything relating to the impact. One of the things we are very aware of, Kiana and I, is that the reason why governments are not more involved in helping Afghan women isn't because they don't know about the situation. This is not breaking news that this state is equivalent to a state of gender apartheid, and it's the worst country in the world to be a woman today. So the reason why they don't intervene and they don't do much is because they don't want to. There's no political will. So then, the question is, then why are we doing a project like that? What is the reason? What is the impact? And there's several responses to that, because personally you have to be able to find a purpose for the project when you know that it might take years until the situation improves. So we try to really focus on small things. One thing is documentation is so important. Whether or not things are going to change now and for the future, it will be now, and it will have been so important for the future generation that we documented how life was for women in Afghanistan. If only to hopefully do a little bit of education on how easily it is to lose your rights as women. Unfortunately, I think it's not news. We've seen it around the globe recently, but it's still very important. We've been pushing the project really hard in the media. We take every opportunity we can, like here, like with TEDx and all, to push the message and try to give concrete ways where we can help Afghan women. And most of these, unfortunately, are not to help them inside the country, but to help them to leave the country. Because right now they cannot go to high school, they cannot go to university, they cannot work in most fields, they cannot leave their house unaccompanied. So they don't have a present and they don't have a future in Afghanistan. And things are going to keep getting worse and worse because without university, we have no new woman doctor, woman nurse, woman teacher. So it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. So one of the things we've been really advocating for is we should be better at offering safe pathways for women to come to Europe and to America and study, so that when the day comes, they can go back to Afghanistan. Because all my friends who left Afghanistan, who've been evacuated, are very happy they could be evacuated, but they want to be in their own country, but a country where they can exist as full citizens. They don't really want to be in France or in the US. It's very hard to migrate and to integrate and start again from scratch. So this question of impact has been extremely important for us. We also try to focus on legal advocacy. So that's more of my side of the work. We've been partnering with Amnesty International, for example, because there's a campaign to codify, which means to create the crime of gender apartheid. It doesn't exist yet. And so when comes a day, and it will take a lot of time, where Taliban leaders can be brought to justice, we need to have the proper legal framework to make sure they are kept accountable for their crimes. So it might feel kind of like nothing. At the same time, we need to focus on these small victories, because otherwise it's just so easy to kind of lose hope, lose faith, and then not continue this work. So I think not doing it is not an option, really. And they have a very lovely saying in Afghanistan, "Katra katra darya mesham," which means like drop by drop will make a river. And I think for us, we just need to focus on one drop and another one, and then just make sure that all of these efforts are going to build on top of each other, and that this will eventually lead to change. And like we saw in August 2021 in Kabul, but also in other countries, like recently in Syria, it's like things can change very, very quickly, and we can't really see it coming sometimes. So I think we just need to continue working and continue having hope, and we really owe it to all of these women and girls as well.
And I think I just have to we need to acknowledge the amazing team we had behind us. And this was, at least I can speak for myself, my first time working with a team backing us up, and it makes a huge difference because they lift pressure off of your shoulders so you can focus doing on what you really want to do. So putting this exhibition together, and also coming the website and the publicist, everything, it's been a teamwork, and we really, really owe it to them to get the work out there and seen.
But also something we need to be very open about is one of the reasons also we've been able to do this partnership, to do this exhibition, to push so much the project in the media, is because We had a team supporting us. We had a luxury that as freelancers, especially, you never have. And I think the types of grants like the Carmignac Foundation today is quite rare, because not only do you get the time and space to do a project, but then you also have comms support, a publicist, an amazing publicist, by the way, to like help you connect and do all of this, take up all of these opportunities, in addition to our own networks, of course. But I think we need to be very honest that all of this takes a lot of money as well, and will. And so I think we've been very lucky, and we'd hope that there would be more opportunities for photographers and journalists and storytellers to find that type of support, really, because I'm not going to go on to the state of how it is to try to work as a photographer or researcher today, freelancer, but would have been quite difficult on our own.
Yeah, and you can create the same exact body of work and not have the support, and no one's going to see it.
Yeah.
So this is where the difference comes in, really.
Yeah. And I think as much work has been put right now into promoting and showing the project as went into actually realizing the work. And it's not something I was really aware of. And it's a privilege, really is. But I think we need to be quite transparent about that as well. And so, for example, one part of the support we're getting as part of the price is we're going to be launching an interactive website so that anyone in the world can have access to this research, to the photos, because exhibitions are great, but not everyone can afford to come to Paris or to Berlin to see the photos. So we're quite glad that it's going to be a very accessible way for people to learn more about this project and to learn more about the situation. And I think that's it. Maybe just the light slide, David, sorry.
Because also Seven has...
And thank you to the Seven Foundation. This is a Seven Foundation in Sarajevo, because our photos and our captions were separated and we don't live in the same country. We met in Sarajevo to caption more than 600 photos. So thanks to the Seven Foundation also for hosting us for this work.
Thank you. That's something that I didn't know before we started this presentation, that last photo was actually in our office in Sarajevo. So good to have played a very small role in what's a fantastic project. We've got quite a few questions, so I'll bring some of those onto the screen and you guys can respond. And if people have questions, please type them in the chat. Let's start with this one from Haley. How did you structure the framework for the project and research, like choosing the provinces, the case studies, different women who participated, etc.?
So we had an idea of like an archetype of things we want to touch base on, right? From education to economic crisis to all these what I like to call pockets under the skin of the city, right? And then we structured that. We're like, where are these places that we mostly can find them, right? Like Central Highland and in Badakhshan, they're much more open-minded. In South, it's much more conservative, and it was even before Taliban took over. It was all these different environments. Herat, much more modern. Kabul being the capital and having received a lot of the aid in the last 20 years. What has happened? So we had all these things, and we kind of like decided, okay, these are these specific topics. We're going to look in these provinces. Obviously, we would have loved to travel to more places, but we had X amount of money, X amount of time, so we had to really optimize our time. Plus, we also, having lived in Afghanistan, we know very well that traveling within Afghanistan can be very difficult. So we had to think about seasons as well. Our first trip was in February in winter. Second trip was late spring. In the winter, you can travel to the north. In spring, the south is way too hot. So we kind of travel from south all the way to the north and covered what we wanted to do. And a lot of it was also access on our network, right? Where are some of these places where we have people, like, for example, we also love to do something in Bamyan. We showed up to Bamyan for some security reason. We decided on the day, we decided to turn back because we just, our guts told us we need to leave, and we were right. We're glad we did.
And the car of Talib also told us to go back, not just our guts.
Yeah,
but
yeah. But and also, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, I remember the moment we decided to leave Bamiyan, it was like in the car with the driver. We're all asking each other, it's like, how do you guys feel? And if one person says, I don't feel good, we're like, we return now.
Yeah.
But everybody felt uncomfortable, so we returned.
Yeah. But also the paperwork. So because we had to use organization to travel to the different provinces, and it was really complicated to get the paperwork in order, we also went to where we could, because except for Bamiyan, where we tried to go as tourists, we actually couldn't just hop on a car, on a plane, and go whenever we wanted. We needed to have the proper authorization from the relevant ministries to travel to certain provinces, and that took weeks, really. There was so much work on that. And then, like Kiana said, we had like a wall in the apartment, and we just had lists also of like places and things and seas we ideally wanted to cover, and then we just did what we could. And then, of course, like with the joy as a form of resistance, things just came up naturally also because we just kept talking and having new ideas and meeting people. So I think it was both. It was a quite organic process.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, security is essential, and I think you just mentioned the Taliban, Kiana, in your answer to that question. But were you followed at any point? How were you able to work given Taliban control?
We obviously we were aware that I mean, Taliban pretty much keeps tabs on foreigners, right? So we try to lay low as much as possible. We assumed we're being followed all the time, so our movement we had to be calculated. If we're meeting someone who's like extremely sensitive case, like make sure, like think about exit entrance, like overlapping phones and all of that. There was one incident in Badakhshan in Faizabad, which is a small town, where a Talib followed us literally 2 meters the whole time and showed up to the guest house that we were staying in. Thankfully, the organization we were working with had our back. They sat down, had a chit chat. Eventually, the Talib asked us to come back and have a chat with them. Um, yeah,
Bamiyan,
Bamiyan
we
was
had some issues as well.
Bamiyan. We had issues, major
But
issues.
then, funnily as well, thanks to another organization, we also managed to get a letter of authorization to shoot in the street. And so, for 2 days, Kiana was able to go and shoot in the street. And on one case, Taliban actually escorted you to take
Yeah,
some of the photos.
I can say one thing. I've worked in Afghanistan for a long time. Shooting outside has never been this difficult. Like, it's impossible to walk more than 10 meters without getting stopped by someone, either with uniform, without uniform, and asking for your paper. Like, it's even if you have the right paper, you can't say we had the right paper, and yet we were escorted to the police stations. And basically, after that, you lose the light and everything. They intentionally make it difficult for you. So, that is also why you see, I mean, we were mostly working in contained spaces, except we needed these outdoor photos to show the neon, because we knew the neon exists on the outdoor, but we needed to portray that. Yes, that was hard. Honestly, those 2 days was like some of the hardest shooting days.
But I also think we managed to go there not on a journalist visa, so we also had a different process than if we had been there on a journalist visa. Even without this, Kiana and I both agree that we would not be able to do this project today because the access, which was already extremely difficult, really closed down. So we were really on the last weeks of being able to still do this project.
So a comment and quite a long question, but essentially, a lot of talented young individuals have left Afghanistan, but they remain committed to trying to work for change. What do you think are some of the ways that Afghans outside the country can support projects aimed at addressing those challenges?
Okay,
Yeah.
um, there's quite a lot of divide among Afghans outside. I think, and sorry, I'm so sorry. I do allow myself to say this because I lived in Afghanistan 1/3 of my life, so part of my identity is like tied to that country. Is I think they need to sort out that divide first before um they need to come together and to be able to support those who stayed in country, because there are Afghans who have stayed in country and they're making changes. They're doing amazing work, doctors and teachers, and who are doing underground activities to to have the society move. And I think, yeah, you just need to connect with these individuals and support them very quietly. Melissa?
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's a very difficult question. I think anyone outside of the country is asking themselves this question. How can you support women? I mean, the economic situation is so bad that anything would help women inside the country. But in terms of changing the policies and making sure their lives would improve, that's much harder because so far there hasn't been any ways in which we have been able to influence the Taliban policies positively. So unfortunately, I think for the first 1 or 2 years of the Taliban rule, there was a lot of efforts trying to engage with them, talk with them, influence these policies. We realized it's not really working. So, for example, Kiana and I think now our big focus is just trying to get visas and scholarship for young Afghan women so that they can go get an education, and they all want to be able to go back and be doctors and engineers and journalists in Afghanistan. So I think it's kind of a temporary solution, and there's not much more we can do, unfortunately.
I mean, you with that example, you started to give some answers to this question from Glenn Ruger about what individuals outside the international framework, the international community can do to help. You talking there about visas and so on. So this is people beyond the Afghan community as well. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
Well, the thing is that there's kind of two school of thoughts. The people who really want to like isolate and sanction and put pressure on the Taliban, and those who really want to engage with them. And so far, none of these have worked really. They don't react positively to any of them. So I think the international community is also a little bit at a loss because we don't really know how we can best support Afghan women. What's very clear for the women we ask inside the country is, for example, anything related to conditioning the aid on progress by the Taliban or anything economically. What the Afghan women say is if you put any type of sanctions or pressure on the economy, we get punished two times, first by the Taliban policy and then by the international community's response to these Taliban policies. So for them, because the economic crisis is almost the main problem for most of them, the main issue is they don't have anything to feed their children and feed their families. Supporting the restart of the private sector and the economy is actually the thing that probably would have the biggest impact right now for Afghan women's lives. For the women's rights themselves, the right to education and to work, it's almost impossible today. We don't know how we can influence the Taliban. We do know that there are a lot of debate internally, and recently we've seen this debate publicly with even some ministers criticizing some of the decision to ban girls from getting an education. So I think we can be a little bit hopeful that these things are happening internally and eventually it might lead to positive change. But once again, this is not something we can do anything about.
And can I add one more thing? I genuinely think change has to come from within. I think one thing that international community messed up was 20 years ago. They tried to bring change. Like change has to happen. So this change has to happen from inside, which means educating the generation that is coming. So support a lot of education projects. There are once the website goes live, and here we can provide links as well. There are organizations who either they're trying with everything they can to educate girls while they're in Afghanistan. There are underground schools that are trying to get them diplomas from schools in America or Canada. So they study in Afghanistan, but they walk away with an American diploma. There are organizations that for those people who have finished high school, they help them and support them to get them outside, to enroll them in university, offer them scholarships. If you have any financial aid, you can donate to them. If you have time, you can volunteer your time. Some of these schools take summer school teachers as volunteers. I think this is the best way to go forward, to educate the next generation so we bring a bright future to Afghanistan.
So those two questions were about help from outside, but this one from Dr. Hashimi is talking about the way in which the women that you're photographing are actually helping each other and the sense of community. Do you think that kind of their response to the Taliban takeover and so on has strengthened community networks in daily life? I mean, how are they managing themselves in their relationships with each other to try and, say, with these hidden schools or other initiatives, respond to the situation?
I fear it will be quite the contrary because now movement is extremely limited, and every time they leave their home, there's so much calculation going into it in terms of being accompanied, being well covered, checkpoints, harassment, that they just don't leave their house as much as before, and also they don't have third places to meet. Really, they don't have schools. You saw like this art gallery when they used to take classes. This is not possible anymore. So they can only really meet in each other's home. So they need for the family, both families, to be supportive, to have a little bit of space and privacy. So if anything, I would say that the support networks have been impacted just because it's much harder for them to meet and to communicate. Then mental health is really impacted as well. And I'm not sure that the young women we met who are really not doing so well mentally manage to turn to their friends and family and network for support. So if anything, I wonder if there's no kind of more isolation, more fighting because of the immense pressure they are under.
Two questions here from Iqbal Hussain. I mean, one about access and then one about the technique of the neon light. How did you get access? I mean, both of you lived for a long time in Afghanistan, so you were not
Yeah.
in the situation of like parachuting in from outside. You were living there for a very long time. But
Yeah.
still, how was access achieved?
So formally, we did not have access for that project. We had to constantly find ways around, like for example, traveling with an NGO to a certain province, things like that. In terms of access to the women, we really built on our past work because Kiana spent a decade in Afghanistan. I spent 7 years there. Kiana speaks Farsi fluently. I speak broken Dari. But that's enough to connect because you understand the culture, you understand the language, you understand the sensitivities. And that already makes a huge difference in how you establish the trust. I think the trust is what gave us the access because also even to reach out to a woman we don't know, we would need a woman that they trust to introduce us so that they know that they can pick up the phone and that we can be trusted, for example. So a lot of it was kind of like this noble technique of using our networks to get this special access, and that's why a lot of the scenes you will see are not very current, like this teenage girls' birthday parties. Like I think we were very privileged to see such a moment, for example.
Yeah.
And on the neon part of it, so I have two things. One related to your question, Iqbal. One is not, but I think it's important to talk about it. Language. Understanding a language also allows you to see nuances. And in places like Afghanistan, Iran, people are polite. People want to help out. So many times they may say yes in situations where they don't want to say yes. And I think as both Melissa and I, as people who have live there, understand the culture, understand the language, you can read in between the lines and understand, okay, we shouldn't pursue this, like they don't really want to it, and not rely on a third person to translate for us. Well, many of the times these nuances are lost. So that's on that. And then about the neon, I actually don't think it helped to establish a connection. If anything, it probably, like, sometimes I guess if we were dealing with educated women, it was easier to explain what we were trying to do, like the idea of like outside, inside, we're going to bring the light in. But for women who have not been educated, haven't been outside of the homes very much, it was actually a bit like odd. Is like why the light is bright pink, but they just like rolled with it.
Kind of another question, kind of touching on technique or whatever. I mean, in the early photographs, you demonstrated the way in which you were keeping people's identities hidden to an extent, extent, to keep them safe and so on. But nonetheless, they were prepared to be photographed, and you said some of them also were quite happy to be visible. So Annette's asking, where do you think those women get their strength from, to actually, given the circumstances, still work with you on portraits?
I think, and this is something I've learned from. I mean, we keep reminding each other. Afghanistan do go through these cycles. This is not the first time that they go through this. If you look at the history of Afghanistan, they've gone through this over the last 100 years. Like every 20 years, there has been a major change. So even if you're a young woman who was born in the last 20 years, you know that in your gene, in your DNA, you know that by heart that there will be a day that this will go away and there will be a new time. So I think that is deeply engraved in the back of your head that yes, as dark as it's extremely dark, if you ask people, nobody knows, nobody has hope for a short time period, but there will be a time. And also, what are we without hope? And I think it's a very important question today, as like we're watching the world is falling apart. And if we don't have hope, says the woman who doesn't have a lot of hope right now, but um, what are Melissa, you?
I feel like a lot of the women who benefited from the education program the past 20 years, they saw what they could get, they got educated, they learned about their rights. And a lot of them keep going also for their daughters, especially. Whether it's thinking about leaving the country, whether it's about opening a secret school, which is often just like one tiny room in a house where they get like, like the girls from the neighborhood to try to teach whatever they can. I think it's really trying to make sure that this generation is not sacrificed, because the longer they're out of school, for example, the harder it is for them to get back to school and to university once this changes. And like Kiana said, if you look at the Afghan history, it gives you hope that things will change eventually. We just all hope that the change, whatever change comes, it will be peaceful.
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of our time, but we've got a good question to finish with from Rick. How does this experience inspire future projects for you both? What I mean, kind of extend that a little bit too, to think about lessons learned from doing a collaborative project like this, in terms of the impact that it's going to have on the future work that you do.
Well, first of all, we're going to turn the project into a website and a book, but we're already talking about working together again. We already have our ideas and our research and everything. So, like I said at the beginning, having found a collaborator with whom things have been just so creative and so easy, I think it's we're very blessed. And so yeah, we're already working on the next project.
And I mean, I found my dream collaborator, and I think for me, lesson learned was, yeah, I've learned. I never relied on someone else when I was collaborating. When I was like, it was never a collaboration. It was always like, I don't know, you were put together and you work, but I never relied on somebody. And I've learned that you can have somebody strong and you can, like sometimes step back or rely on them, and everything will be perfect. For me, the biggest, and it's really personal. It's not about project. It's about like a personal growth, really, and it will impact me in my life, that you can rely on someone. And also, yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway for me.
Well, we're really grateful for your presentation. We're grateful for the time and the questions that you've answered. People will see the URL for the website in the chat, going live on March the 8th. This is March the 8th, 2025. Hard to believe that year, really. So there's going to be a lot of follow-up there. But Kiana, Mélissa, thank you very much for being with us to showcase that project and talk about your collaboration. And to people in the audience, thank you very much for watching and some great questions.
Thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for bringing good questions.
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone.